2 months out of college, and I finally moved into my own apartment. I was starting work the following week, so things were pretty hectic. My friend Jason helped me move in, so that was a plus, and I ran into one of my neighbors, a kind older lady, who was very sweet. The neighbor directly on the other side of the hall, however, was a different story. His name was Bob, and he was a balding middle-aged guy who spoke in a very quiet voice and avoided making eye contact. Bob introduced himself the day after I moved in, his voice barely above a whisper as he offered to help me with the jammed window lock. "I know a few tricks with rope," he said, avoiding my gaze. It turned out he had a passion for tying knots, a hobby he pursued in his spare time after retiring from some warehouse job. He even showed me a few basic ones in the hallway, his hands moving with surprising dexterity. At first, it was endearing in a quirky way. He left a hand-tied welcome mat outside my door, the fringes secured with beautiful Celtic knots. But soon, the incidents started piling up in ways that made my skin crawl. One night, I came home from grocery shopping to find my apartment door slightly ajar. Inside, every drawer in my kitchen had been pulled out and the handles tied together with intricate bowline knots. Nothing was missing, but the precision of it all suggested someone had spent time there while I was gone. I changed the locks the next day, but it didn't stop. My shoes would be laced together with slip knots when I woke up. The cords on my blinds were knotted so tightly, I could not open them fully. I confronted Bob about it one afternoon, but he just stared at the floor and muttered, "Loose ends are dangerous, I tie them up for safety." It was the same quiet tone he always used, but this time it sent chills down my spine. Things only escalated when my friend Jason stopped by again for dinner. We heard scratching sounds from the hall, and when I opened the door, Bob was there, kneeling with a length of rope. He was tying some kind of complex knot around the doorknob of my apartment from the outside. "I'm just making sure it's secure," he whispered. Jason laughed it off, but I saw the intensity in Bob's eyes for the first time. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., I heard the distinct sound of rope being pulled tight right outside my bedroom window. Peering through the blinds, I saw Bob on the fire escape, methodically tying knots to the railing, creating a web of ropes that blocked any escape route. The whole time, he was humming softly to himself. I panicked, then called the police, but before they arrived, Bob knocked on my door again. When I didn't answer, he used what must have been a duplicate key, how he got it I will never know, and slipped inside. "You need to be tied down," he said in his quiet voice, holding up a coil of rope, "like the others." I fought back, using a lamp to knock him out just as the police sirens wailed outside. It turned out Bob had a history. The knots were his signature in several unsolved cases of people found bound in their homes. They were alive but traumatized, as if he had been securing them from some imaginary threat in his delusional mind. He was institutionalized, but the experience left me paranoid for sure. I moved out shortly after. I just couldn't stay in that apartment after what happened. Even now, in my new place across town, I sometimes find a small, perfectly tied knot left on my welcome mat. And every time, I wonder if Bob has really been stopped, or if some loose ends remain untied. I'd just broken up with my long-term girlfriend and decided I needed a change of pace. We, or mostly I, had been saving up to buy a house one day, and somehow I managed to find one near where I lived for a very affordable price. I figured buying it now, even if I was single, could help me build up equity and avoid burning money on rent every month. Plus, having my own house meant more freedom to do what I wanted. The realtor had mentioned the previous owners left suddenly, which explained the bargain price. My neighbor to the right was Mr. Harlan, a soft-spoken retired engineer in his early 60s. He introduced himself the day I moved in, offering help with some heavy boxes. "I find tying knots very calming," he told me with a gentle smile, never quite meeting my eyes for long. I learned it years ago to stay focused. Over the next few weeks, Mr. Harlan would occasionally wave from his yard while working on elaborate rope projects. He left a beautiful hand-tied welcome sign on my porch one afternoon. It seemed thoughtful at first, but then the strangeness began. My trash bins were tied tightly together with square knots one morning. The garden hose was secured in a series of figure-8 loops that made it impossible to use without untying them perfectly. They were small things, always fixed with professional precision. Then I started noticing patterns. Every time I left the house for more than an hour, something new would be knotted when I returned. It could be my bicycle lock chain that was woven into an intricate pattern. Another time it was the laces on my running shoes left by the door. They were tied together in a way that would take minutes to undo. There were never any signs of forced entry, just the quiet evidence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Things started to come to a head one night when I caught Mr. Harlan near my shed. He claimed he was just checking the structural lines, whatever that meant, and showed me a complex knot he called a sheepshank. He said it could shorten rope under tension. His voice stayed calm and reasonable, but the fact that he kept talking about knots was unnerving, and something in his methodical movements made my stomach tighten. I decided to confront him and politely asked him to stop touching my things. He didn't say anything for a moment, then nodded slowly and muttered, "Some people don't understand how important it is to keep everything properly secured. Loose connections lead to accidents." The fear crept in gradually after that. I installed a camera, but he seemed to know exactly where the blind spots were. I found my bedroom curtains tied back so tightly I couldn't close them at night, leaving me exposed to the darkness between our houses. Then came the night I woke to the faint sound of rope sliding against wood. My wrists were loosely bound to the headboard with soft paracord while I slept, not tight enough to hurt, but enough to hold me in place. Then I found the note tucked under my hand. "You were tossing and turning. I needed to steady you." I panicked, cutting myself free and then calling the police. Of course, Mr. Harlan denied everything, with that same quiet conviction. The officers found no proof of entry and seemed to think I might be stressed from the breakup. After they left, Mr. Harlan stood on his porch watching me, slowly tying and untying a small loop in his hands. I sold the house at a loss 3 months later, desperate to escape. The new owners seemed happy at first, but last week I drove by out of morbid curiosity. There, tied neatly around my old mailbox post, was a fresh knot, the same distinctive style Mr. Harlan used. I haven't stopped checking my doors and windows every night since. Some knots, it seems, are impossible to fully untie. My parents moved around for business when I was a kid, and while I don't remember all the places we stayed, I do distinctively remember one of the houses we lived in when I was around 8. It was a 2-story colonial on a quiet cul-de-sac in a sleepy Midwestern town, the kind of place where every yard had a neat white fence and kids rode bikes until the streetlights buzzed on. My dad's job had us there for what was supposed to be 6 months while he oversaw a factory upgrade, and at first it really felt like an adventure. The house even had a big oak tree in the backyard perfect for climbing. Our next-door neighbor was Mr. Whitaker, a widower in his late 50s who lived alone in a house that always smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and motor oil when the wind shifted. I still remember when he introduced himself in the afternoon we pulled into the driveway, shaking my dad's hand with a firm grip while his eyes lingered on me. "Name's Whitaker," he said, in a low, steady voice. "Been here 30 years. I tie knots. Used to be a boatswain on cargo ships before the back gave out. Keeps the hands busy, you know." He smiled, but it never quite reached his eyes. At first, Mr. Whitaker seemed like the perfect neighbor for a lonely kid. My parents were both working long hours, so I spent a lot of time outside. He'd wave me over to his garage and show me different knots on a coil of thick nylon rope he kept hanging from a hook. "This one's a clove hitch," he'd explain patiently, guiding my small fingers. "Holds tight, but easy to undo. Good for securing things that might slip away." At one point, he gave me a bracelet he'd knotted himself, a simple Turk's head pattern in blue and red, and told me it would keep me safe even if I got lost. I wore it every day after that. Then, after a couple more weeks, the little gift started feeling off. One morning I found my bicycle chained to the porch railing with a series of perfect monkey's fists, not so intricate I couldn't figure out how to loosen them without scissors. I immediately went to my parents, but they just laughed it off. "He's just being neighborly," Mom said while Dad cut the rope free. "Probably saw it was loose and fixed it." Then my sneakers began showing up tied together every night, the laces woven into a sailor's knot that took me 10 minutes to undo before school. My bedroom window sash was secured shut with a taut line hitch, even though I always left it cracked for fresh air. I started avoiding the garage, but Mr. Whitaker didn't seem to notice. He'd still call out to me from his side of the fence, offering to teach me a new knot or show me how to lash a tarp down in case of storms. One Saturday I came home from the park to find my entire collection of action figures arranged on the windowsill. Each one's arms and legs were bound tightly together with tiny loops of fishing line. Nothing was broken, but the precision of it made my stomach flip. When I told my parents, Dad again sighed and said kids imagine things when they're bored. Mom promised to talk to him, but didn't seem motivated. As time went on, the fear kept building. I began hearing soft scraping sounds at night from the narrow alley between our houses. It was like rope being pulled taut against wood. Once, around midnight, I peeked through the blinds and saw Mr. Whitaker on a stepladder, methodically tying a web of ropes around the drain pipe that ran up to the side of our house. "Just reinforcing it," he muttered to himself when I cracked the window to ask what the hell he was doing. "The wind can get fierce here. Don't want anything coming loose." The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening. My parents were at a work dinner across town, leaving me with a frozen pizza and strict instructions to lock the doors. I was halfway through my homework when the power flickered and went out. In the sudden dark, I heard the back door creak open. Mr. Whitaker had a spare key my parents had given him for emergencies. He stepped inside, carrying a lantern and a thick coil of rope. "Heard the outage on the scanner," he whispered, his voice calm but his hands always working. "Power lines can snap. Best to tie everything down so nothing gets hurt." Before I could run upstairs, he had looped a soft length of paracord around my wrist and the leg of the kitchen chair. It wasn't tight enough to cut off circulation, but it was still secure enough that I couldn't pull free. "Steady now," he said, almost kindly. "You're safe. I've done this for others who needed it. It keeps the loose ends from causing trouble." I screamed until my throat hurt. The neighbors across the street heard and called the police. When the officers arrived 20 minutes later, Mr. Whitaker was still sitting there, patiently tying decorative loops around the chair legs, explaining to them that he was only trying to secure the boy. He said it was the way he once secured cargo during storms at sea. The police took him away for questioning after finding similar ropes in his garage. Dozens of them, labeled with dates and addresses from houses all over the town where families had lived temporarily. It turned out he had a record of protective incidents stretching back years, people waking up with furniture lashed together, kids finding their bikes or toys knotted in place. It was nothing violent, just an obsession born from losing his wife in a boating accident decades earlier. He believed knots could prevent future loss. Thankfully, my parents cut our stay short, and we left town 2 weeks later, the moving truck pulling away while Mr. Whitaker watched from his porch. Even then, he was slowly untying and retying a single length of rope in his hands. I never saw him again, thank God. Years later, as an adult, I looked up the old address online out of morbid curiosity. The house had new owners, but the listing photos showed something that made my blood run cold. A hand-tied welcome wreath on the front door, the exact same Turk's head pattern he had taught me all those years ago. I still keep that old bracelet in a drawer, untouched. Some nights I wake up convinced I can feel the faint tug of invisible knots around my wrists, and I wonder how many other kids in how many temporary houses learned the hard way, that some neighbors never really let go. I figured I'd share this story, since I'm so grateful things happen this way, and it's really unbelievable. To set the scene, I was 23 years old, working a fast-paced job in finance. I loved the challenge, but the lifestyle made my migraines worse over time. I'd saved enough money and moved into a house in a modest but nice area, hoping that having more space, including a gym room, could help me work out the energy. A week before I moved, my neurologist started me on this new migraine medication, which seemed to substantially help, and incidentally, led to the most fateful moment of my life. The house was a cozy 2-bedroom bungalow with a shared driveway that butted right up against my neighbor's place on the left. She introduced herself the day the movers left, stepping out onto her porch in a long black dress with lace sleeves and combat boots. Her dark hair fell in waves around pale skin and striking green eyes. Her name was Leela, and she looked to be my same age, working from home as a freelance illustrator for horror comics and graphic novels. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, with a soft, slightly husky voice, offering me a handmade candle that smelled like cedar and rain. I noticed right away the intricate knotwork on the wick holder, a perfect Celtic knot she tied herself from thin black cord. "It's just a hobby," she explained when I complimented it. "Tying knots helps me focus when I'm sketching. It calms the chaos." At first, it seemed charming. Leela was beautiful, with silver rings on every finger and a quiet intensity that made conversations feel deeper than small talk. Over the next couple of weeks, we'd chat over the low fence while I grilled or she watered her overgrown garden of night-blooming flowers. She showed me a few knots one evening after work, demonstrating a figure-8 loop on a length of soft rope she kept coiled on her porch railing. It's useful for everything from securing packages to, well, creative projects. She said that with a wink that could have been playful, or something else. I tried laughing it off, but there was just something about the precision of her hands, quick, deliberate, and never fumbling, that stuck with me. The creepiness crept in slowly. One morning I woke up to find my trash cans lined up perfectly and lashed together with a series of square knots, the kind that wouldn't budge even in wind. Nothing was damaged, but I hadn't done it. Leela waved from her window when she saw me staring, calling out, "Sorry if that was overstepping." They were rolling around last night after that storm. I hate loose ends. I was caught completely off guard and tried to thank her awkwardly, but inside I felt a chill. Then my gym equipment started showing up rearranged. The resistance bands tied into elaborate trucker's hitches, the dumbbells secured to the rack with clove hitches. They were literally so tight I had to cut them free. My running shoes appeared on the back step one night with their laces woven into a decorative diamond knot that took 20 minutes to undo. I started locking my doors extra carefully and even considered a security camera. I wondered if her helpful habit was crossing into something obsessive. Meanwhile, the medication was a godsend for my migraines. They were down to almost nothing, but it came with a brutal side effect I hadn't expected. Night terrors hit hard about 10 days in. I'd wake up screaming, heart pounding, with no memory of the dreams, or I'd sleepwalk through the house, banging into furniture and yelling incoherently. One night I even found myself in the kitchen at 3 a.m. with a drawer pulled out and utensils scattered, with no idea how I'd gotten there. I didn't want to stop the pills. The relief from the crushing headaches was too good, and my doctor said the side effects might fade. But the exhaustion was wearing me down, and I avoided telling anyone, especially Leela, who already seemed a little too interested in my routines. The tension kept building, though. I'd catch glimpses of her through the curtains at odd hours, her silhouette bent over some rope project on her dining table. The soft glow of her lamp cast long shadows. She left a small basket of knot tying supplies on my porch one day with a note. For stress relief, it said. Thought it might help with whatever's keeping you up at night. How did she know I wasn't sleeping well? This is when paranoia really started to set in. Had she been watching me? Listening through the thin walls? I started sleeping with earplugs and a baseball bat by the bed, convincing myself her knot obsession was harmless, but her timing was too perfect. Incidentally, the fear made the night terrors worse. I'd thrash and shout, once even knocking over a lamp that shattered loudly enough to echo between our houses. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Thursday, around 2 a.m. I'd been in the middle of a particularly vicious night terror, screaming and flailing in my sleep, probably banging against the headboard and walls like a madman. I didn't really remember any of it, but when I finally jolted awake, gasping for air, I was pinned down. There were soft but strong ropes, paracord I later realized, and they were tied in careful padded loops around my wrists and ankles. They secured me gently to the bedposts. My heart hammered in pure panic as I saw a figure standing over me in the dim moonlight filtering through the blinds. It was Leela, dressed in her usual black, holding the end of one rope with wide eyes and a look of sheer horror on her face. But then she gasped, dropping the rope like it burned her. "Oh my God, it's you? I heard screaming and crashes from your house. It sounded like someone was breaking in and attacking you. I rushed over, the back door was already unlocked, and I saw someone thrashing. I thought it was the intruder and tried to tie him down, but it was you. I didn't realize you were just having a nightmare until you woke up and I saw your face." Leela's voice cracked, and she looked genuinely terrified at what she'd done. Her hands were trembling as she started to untie the knots with practiced but frantic speed. I just lay there, chest heaving, processing her words while the ropes loosened. The bat I'd kept by the bed was on the floor, knocked over during my sleepwalking episode. Something in her voice told me that Leela was being genuine. She hadn't broken in maliciously. She really had rushed over in the middle of the night, thinking my life was in danger. The same knots she'd shown me as a hobby had been used to secure the situation in seconds. I could tell she was mortified, so I tried to talk with her, and we ended up talking for hours after that. She started by apologizing profusely and explained how her knot tying came from years of anxiety management after a rough childhood. She also hadn't been creeping on me. She'd just been observant, worried about the new guy next door who seemed off lately. Oddly enough, that misunderstanding cracked open something real between us. The intrigue of the night, the fear turning to relief, and the way her quick thinking had actually kept me safe from bashing my head on the nightstand, sparked a connection neither of us expected. We actually started dating a week later, slowly at first, with coffee dates and late-night talks where she taught me more knots and I opened up about the meds and the terrors. It turns out, the gentle restraint of being tied down mimicked the weighted blankets and calming techniques my doctor had suggested, but that never quite worked. The first time she offered to tie me in bed again, not as a rescue, but as an experiment with soft, safe silk ropes and quick release loops, I slept through the night for the first time in weeks. No thrashing, no screams, just deep, peaceful rest. Now, a year later, Leela and I are engaged and still living in that same bungalow, her illustrations of dark fantasy scenes hanging next to my finance charts on the walls. She ties me up every night before bed, beautiful, intricate patterns that she designs just for me, always with safety in mind. And it keeps the night terrors at bay while the medication handles the migraines. What started as something that could have been a horror story became the best thing that ever happened to me. Sometimes I catch her smiling at the ropes in the morning light, and I know we're both grateful for that one wild night when her passion for knots saved her neighbor from his own demons and tied their futures together in the process.